Can you see this title, The Exotic, the Erotic, and the Dangerous?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, good. So it means we have actually, I have successfully shared screen. Okay, did you watch this short film about Edward Said?
No, ma'am.
Ma'am, I've read the book, but not the film. I don't.
All right, so if you didn't watch the film, we'll try quickly going through it. And if I don't know if you will get good signal if I start, showing it to you right now, but we can certainly see parts of it. Okay, let's see what it says. So just try to see the images that are included in this video, and also try to understand what Edward Said is saying. So did anyone watch it at all? Okay, I would suggest that try seeing and try understanding what they are saying in terms of Orientalism, right? So this is something that has existed for over 200 years now, because it may have existed longer, but Said is talking about uh, artworks or paintings or sculptures and a few different things that were produced over last 200 years, and he thinks that he sees Orientalism in art and literature of past 200 years. So this is the same thing that he found in films, and he created this theory of Orientalism. I would say about half a century ago. And as I said, that feminism and Orientalism and all these things were uh, very popular about half a century ago in 1960s and after. Okay, let's see what he's saying here. All right. Uh, Try describing the images that you have just seen. You know, uh, look at these women, for example, and see, try to understand their gestures, right? See, you can see how these women are behaving, and you can
Because
also
they're
see
protesting.
they are protesting, but how do they appear? Of course, they are protesting, but how do they appear?
Angry.
Yes,
Angry.
they appear angry, they appear violent, and they appear dangerous to a white man, right? What about women or men in the images that you saw before this one, right?
Yes.
All of these images, right? Just try explaining. I have turned on off the audio, so you can see that women are fully covered. So to a Western mind, she appears oppressed, right? In this image.
Yes.
And
Yes.
men are traveling on horses and camels, so they also appear quite backward, just by the selection of mode of travel, right? And the next one. Okay, you can see another Muslim man, his face is fully covered, and he is running with a flag in his hand. So, and still another woman who appears very exotic, and another man from this part of the world who is fighting with swords, and a white man, ignoring his action, shoots him with a gun, right? So you can see that Oriental man looks quite primitive in his image and in terms of treatment of his image. And here, man from this part of the world actually bows to the white imperial. And this must have been something from Palestine or Israel, because you could see the star with 6 corners on the flag. Just see the flag, okay? So you can see that Islam and Oriental man from this part of the world actually represents war and danger and terrorism in this kind of image.
Yes, and very violent.
And also, yes, of course, very violent. So here again, Oriental man is fighting with swords, and white man has a solution for this kind of man. And the woman again is oppressed. Uh, the Arab in this image looked like a terrorist and is murdered. And again, you can see that Oriental people travel on camels in this one. So they don't have the latest technology. In this one, you see mysticism. You see a nude child with his back towards the viewer and a snake in his hand, right? And as you can say, probably a cobra wrapped uh, all around his body, and he's facing these men sitting on floor. So you can see a lot of myth around this kind of culture. Again, a terrorist and white man being the savior, and then Saddam Hussein being from this part of the world is somebody who posed a larger threat to white nations, and Khomeini from Iran. So both Iran and Iraq did appear as threat to Western nations for a very long time. I would say for last 40 years. And and Khomeini, Imam Khomeini actually symbolizes a lot of oppression to the Western world in this kind of image, because he actually imposed veil on women in Iran. And during his period, he also announced death sentence for Salman Rushdie for publishing satanic verses and a lot of other content that he thought that freedom of expression does not mean that you start hurting emotions of people of Muslim world. So he thought that Salman Rushdie should be murdered, and Iran did announce at the time that whoever kills Salman Rushdie would be given a political asylum in Iran, and also Iran will take care of the person in future. So after making this kind of announcement, you could see that Muslim world or people from this part of the world appeared barbaric and oppressive for women. Okay, so let's try seeing what is being said right after. I hope you are aware of Salman Rushdie's book, Satanic Verses, and many other very controversial books, because his books do reflect on politics and religion of this part of the world.
When future scholars take a look back at the intellectual history of the last quarter of the 20th century, the work of Professor Edward Said of Columbia University will be identified as very important and influential. In particular, Said's 1978 book, Orientalism, will be regarded as profoundly significant. Orientalism revolutionized the study of the Middle East and helped to create and shape entire new fields of study, such as post-colonial theory, as well as influencing disciplines as diverse as English, history, anthropology, political science, and cultural studies. The book has now been translated into 26 languages and is required reading at many universities and colleges. It is also one of the most controversial scholarly books of the last 30 years, sparking intense debate and disagreement. Orientalism tries to answer the question of why, when we think of the Middle East, for example, we have a preconceived notion of what kind of people live there, what they believe, how they act, even though we may never have been there or indeed even met anyone from there. More generally, Orientalism asks, How do we come to understand people, strangers, who look different to us by virtue of the color of their skin? The central argument of Orientalism is that the way we acquire this knowledge is not innocent or objective, but the end result of a process that reflects certain interests. That is, it is highly motivated. Specifically, Said argues that the way the West, Europe and the US, looks at the countries and peoples of the Middle East is through a lens that distorts the actual reality of those places and those people. He calls this lens through which we view that part of the world Orientalism, a framework that we use to understand the unfamiliar and the strange, to make the peoples of the Middle East appear different and threatening. Professor Said's contribution to how we understand this general process of what we could call stereotyping has been immense. The aim of this program is to explore these issues through an interview with him. He starts by discussing the context within which he conceived Orientalism.
Well, my interest in Orientalism began for two reasons. One was an immediate thing, that is to say, the Arab-Israeli War of 1973, which had been preceded by a lot of images and discussions in the media and the popular press, about how the Arabs are cowardly and they don't know how to fight and they're, always going to be beaten because they're not modern. And then everybody was very surprised when the Egyptian army crossed the canal in early October of 1973 and demonstrated that, like anybody else, they could fight. So that was one immediate impulse. And the second one, which has a much longer history in my own life, was the constant sort of disparity I felt between what my experience of being an Arab was and the representations of that one saw in art. I mean, I'm talking about very great artists, like Delacroix and Ingres and Jérôme and people like that, novelists who wrote about the Orient, like Disraeli or Flaubert. And, the fact that those representations of the Orient had very little to do with what I knew about my own background in life. So I decided to write the history of that. If somebody, let's say in the 1850s or 60s in Paris or London, wished to talk about or read about India or Egypt or Syria, there would be very little chance for that person to simply address the subject, as we like to think, in a kind of free and creative way. A great deal of writing had gone before. And this writing was an organized form of writing, like an organized science, what I've called Orientalism. And it seemed to me that there was a kind of repertory of images that kept coming up, the sensual woman who's there to be sort of used by the man. The East is a kind of mysterious place full of secrets and monsters. The marvels of the East was a phrase that was used. And the more I looked, the more I saw that this was really quite consistent with itself. It had very little to do with people who had actually been there. And even if they had been there, there wasn't much modification. In other words, you didn't get what you could call realistic representations of the Orient, either in literature or in painting or in music or any of the arts. And this extended even further into descriptions of the Arabs by experts, people who had studied them. And I noticed that even in the 20th century, some of the same images that you found in the 19th century, amongst scholars like Edward William Lane, who wrote his book on the modern Egyptians in the early 1830s, and then you read somebody in the 1920s, and they're more or less saying the same thing. One great example that I always give is that the wonderful French poet Gérard de Nerval, who went on a voyage to the Orient, as he called it. And I was reading this book of his travels in Syria, and there was something very familiar about it. It sounded like something else that I'd read. And then I realized that what he was doing almost unconsciously was quoting Lane on the Egyptians, on the theory that the Orientals are all the same, no matter where you find them. I mean, if it's in India or in Syria or in Egypt, it's basically the same essence. So there develops a kind of image of the timeless Orient, as if the Orient unlike the West, doesn't develop. It stays the same. And that's one of the problems with Orientalism, is it creates an image outside of history, of something that is placid and still and, eternal, which is simply contradicted by the facts of history. You see, so in that one sense, it's a creation of you might say an ideal other for Europe.
Okay, so is it clear what he's saying? And he's talking about a number of countries that are actually part of Orient. So if you had time to look at any of other videos in Google Classroom, some of those videos actually provide you a list of countries in the Middle East, in Far East, in the subcontinent and parts of Africa that are actually part of Orient. So a list of 22 countries that actually belong to Orient. And what Saeed is saying here is that 18th century literature, for example, books by Lane, and then 19th century literature by Gerard bin Nehwau, they actually represent Orient in a similar fashion as a place that does not change over a period of time. And he feels that these images that these books actually mention, they are actually consistent with themselves. For example, they do not represent men changing over a period of time or men changing with the kind of place they lived in. So no matter where they lived in the Orient, they were all the same. For example, these three people would actually represent one face for the West. And at the same time, he's saying that no matter if they were paintings by great painters of the time, these paintings actually represented women from this part of the world as exotic or oppressed or sensual, and they represented men as barbaric. And these images, to the Western thought or Western mind, these images were quite consistent over a period of 200 years, and these images were quite different from the images a native had about his birthplace. For example, he says he himself, Edward Said himself, knew his country differently, but Orientalism in past books and paintings did show it was very consistent, and it was not the same that an Oriental man knew himself about his country or about his birthplace. Any comment on representations of Orient in this one? Because then Edward said, if you watch the rest of the film, he keeps talking about that these images have been there all the time, and because this Orient is considered barbaric and oppressive and exotic. So if there is a disturbance in this part of the world, for example, in case of Oklahoma disaster back in 1995 and other wars, it was thought that, like media has been calling him to get his opinion about the war or about the situation. And they thought that it's because of the people are barbaric, the people who live in this part of the world. There is another video here. If you play this video, this is in Google Classroom. It does provide you a list of countries in the Far East. Let's see the countries that it says actually come under this heading.
Mix of made-up parts along with themes from North African, Middle Eastern world consisting of a mix of made-up parts along with themes from North African, Middle Eastern, East Asian and South Asian cultures. Orientalism has played a vast role in Western advertising. It consists of themes such as magic, sexuality, barbarism, hedonism, and so forth. Structure of Orientalism is nothing more than a structure of deceptions or of myths. Orientalism designed to challenge the bias embedded of the Western population. Orientalism became a great way to sell things and interest Western population all around the world using movies, books, ads, fashion, and so on. In the movie The Interview, it operates within the discursive framework of Orientalism. It is portrayed as exotic in comparison to Western standards and subjugated by the countries of the West, and basically the whole film includes the controversies within Orientalism framework. In these movies like Aladdin and The Dictator, there is a settled type of characterization that the West essentialized these societies as underdeveloped, primitive, romanticizes and represents them with false cultural and stereotypes. In Katy Perry's music video Dark Horse, it illustrates how cultural appropriation continues to be manifested on a global scale through celebrity artists using different styles of exotic cultures and themes. Even in acts, it's using the theme sexuality by having sexual phrase and attraction from the woman and man in the ad. This way it gets the audience attention. Overall, Orientalism is not a new idea, but it continues to permeate in the world. It is important to keep in mind, because it is a learned field of study that has been continuing to change and develop over time.
Okay, so any comment on the images? So you can see that these images and Western thought actually mentions countries of this part of the world as exotic, and sexuality is exotic, mystic, magic is also part of this part of the world. So they do represent people from here in one way, all the way through history. So this video is also there in Google Classroom in case anyone of you wishes to watch it. Okay, I think this one was the second video there. In this one where we were watching Saeed's interview, he said the word that is used is marvels of the East. But when you actually try to dissect this word marvel of the East, you will come across this kind of images. So basically the word marvel is a sugar coating kind of thing that does present Orient as barbaric and oppressive, but marvel probably seems to imply something better or something good. Okay, so let's see a little bit more of this video, and then we go back to Yasmin Javani's article.
The repertory of images that kept coming up, the sensual woman, the Christian, all realistic. Any of the experts, the 20th among the 18th thing,
Professor Saeed's analysis of Orientalism isn't just a description of its content, but a sustained argument for why it looks the way it does. It's an examination of the quite concrete historical and institutional context that creates it. Specifically, Saeed locates the construction of Orientalism within the history of imperial conquest. As empires spread across the globe, historically the British and the French have been the most important in terms of the East. They conquer not only militarily, but also what we could call ideologically. The question for these empires is, how do we understand the natives that we are encountering so we can conquer and subdue them easier?
All right, so all he's saying here that imperialism and Orientalism represent the opposite or the other for each other, right? So that's why he's saying that because French and British had ruled most of the world, and this part of the world was a colony, so for the Western thought, the Oriental or the colonized citizen is the other, who appears as barbaric to the Raj in many cases, or to the white colonizer from France.
This process of using large abstract categories to explain people who look different, whose skin is a different color, has been going on for a long time, as far back as there has been contact between different cultures and peoples. But Orientalism makes this general process more formal in that it presents itself as objective knowledge.
Any comment on what you have heard so far? Because then these stereotypes or objective knowledge of this part of the world becomes the lens for looking at people from this part of the world. So what he's saying, what Saeed is saying is that this lens becomes a must for anyone from a white world or from imperial world. This lens is essential for looking at people from this part of the world or native of this part of the world. Ji, any comment?
Yes, Mr. Comment, like the way he said, they make it look like it's an objective impression of the South Asian groups of people. That just shows के जैसे आपने भी mention किया है कि the time from when they colonized इस तरह की regions वगैरह, तो obviously people protested and they fought for their lands वगैरह, तो they were उस वक्त angry and आगे जाके फिर अपनी movies में अपनी books में they just made South Asian people appear as violent in general, like that's how they're supposed to be. अपनी paintings में हर जगह उन्होंने South Asian लोगों को violent और angry और barbaric दिखाया है, and they didn't leave any room for imagination कि हाँ they can be different, because that's how they saw us in those times.
Okay,
when
thank
they
you.
colonized us.
All right, that's extremely nice that you mentioned imagination, because Yasmin Devani calls it Western imagination in her article, the article that we want to read today, because this is the Western imagination about the people from this part of the world. Yes, Komal, you wanted to add something?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I was just thinking कि ये जो process होता है कि we create images of the other person, जैसे Orientalism है, हम लोग इसको 3-4 साल से पढ़े हैं यूनिवर्सिटी में हमारे डिपार्टमेंट में. तो I was just thinking कि ये हमारी तरफ से भी तो होता था कि we had images of the people in the West, कि उनका ड्रेस कैसे होगा या फिर वो सोचते कैसे होंगे. सिर्फ ये मुझे ऐड करना था कि भी थोड़ी सी कंफ्यूजन हो जाती है.
No,
दोनों वे में.
Yes, it applies both ways, but the only difference is that that Hollywood cinema is part of white imperialism, because Hollywood imperializes the rest of the world, or cinemas of the rest of the world. Until before we had digital filmmaking, which means right now each one of us can make something and actually upload on YouTube, right? But this was not the case until a few decades back, right? And you can say that digital age actually broke monopoly of the Hollywood cinema, because Hollywood cinema was as imperial as was white man. And in most countries, Hollywood cinema was considered, to be part of national cinemas, because in Pakistan we have been banning, for example, Indian film for a very long time. We are never comfortable allowing Indian cinema to become part of our cinemas, because national cinema is quite often monolithic, which means that national cinema would try to promote certain type of ideologies in terms of nationalism or in terms of family. Like national cinema would show how Pakistani families are and what kind of culture Pakistani families like practice, and Pakistani traditional woman or traditional man would have a certain behavior or attitude, right? So that's why I'm saying that national cinemas are often monolithic in terms of ideologies, and cinemas of other part of the world actually try to break these monolithic processes of national cinemas. Gee, I think somebody wants to say something. You can add.
Miss, can I add something?
I think
No.
Yes, two people have raised hands. I think add one after the other. Yes, please.
Okay, so Miss, I think I agree with कोमल कि हमारे भी काफी ज्यादा impressions उनके होते हैं, like हमारे दिमाग में उनका एक impression बना हुआ है वेस्ट का. लेकिन also I think कि हमारी जो मीडिया होती है, हमारे जो movies वगैरह होती हैं, हम उसमें इतना वेस्ट को represent नहीं करते. Usually हमारी अपनी ही stories होती हैं, हमारी अपनी family के जो जो कल्चरल एस्पेक्ट्स हैं उनको हम शो कर रहे होते हैं अपने ड्रामाज में. लेकिन मैंने ये वेस्ट वाली मूवीज में काफी ज्यादा देखा है कि दे यूज our people as representation of certain concepts. Like they would use a Muslim woman to show oppression. के हमेशा मैंने usually ये देखा है कि movies में, Hollywood movies में सुना होता है कि एक लड़की ने हिजाब पहना हुआ है तो वो दिखाएंगे कि अच्छा एक स्टोरी है कि शी इज ऑप्रेस्ड, शी फील्स ऑप्रेस्ड. एंड उसके अलावा वो टेररिज्म को रिप्रेजेंट करने के लिए वो किसी लाइक अफगानिस्तान वाले एरिया में या फिर मुस्लिम लोगों को दिखा देंगे, तो वो दे यूज अस एज टूल्स टू बेसिकली रिप्रेजेंट सर्टेन कॉन्सेप्ट्स which I don't think we do. I mean, हाँ मे बी थोड़ा सा स्लाइटली, लेकिन वो काफी एक्सप्लिसिटली वो कभी कभार कर देते हैं, which I think shows के मतलब basically that just shows के they have more power over this whole concept, you know, के representing certain group of people in a certain way.
All right.
मैं
So,
अगर थोड़ा सा
Miss,
एक बार
can I, Komal, sorry, I really want to add
it's
something.
okay please.
Can I please? Thank you. Miss, लेकिन मेरा ये सवाल है कि the representations that we have, उसमें the white man is seen as what it was for us, which is the colonizer, which is के someone who took away our culture, someone who took away our autonomy over our own politics and our own society and imposed a certain rule of law upon us. So I think it's not too deviant from what reality was for people at that time. And like जो थोड़ी बहुत representations white man की निकली हैं, फिर वो भी is a product of the Oriental image that they've created in media, which is their presentations in a certain manner. And even like a long while ago, there were very few movies being made जिनमें the American or the white man was being challenged as the colonizer. For example, like I think like movies like Lagan did that. They did show it as it is, and there were a lot of more. There were movies such as there was a Mangal Pandey. This was also Amir Khan ki, and ma'am, like there was another movie that was written in one of the articles that we had read previously. It was called Uran Khatola, and the premise of the movie was it was like a fantasy movie where a man lands into a matriarchal society. This was made by India, but when I saw the movie, it had a lot of Oriental elements to it, because the women did not उन्हें भी उस तरह से eroticize and exoticize करके दिखाया हुआ था, and this was made in like the early 1950s of India. So वो Oriental images हमारे अंदर भी like एक तरह से like we also ended up accepting them.
okay. You're saying that we have internalized our own images. Internalized our own images that Western societies has created about us.
Yes, to
Okay.
a certain extent.
Okay, so I would say that what Komal was saying earlier, like we also create stereotypes of Western societies, is also correct. But we do not create into the extent West creates about us. Okay, for example, when we were reading this article, we last week we read this article by Sadaf Ahmed, right? We were reading Sexualized Objects and Embodiment of Honor, Rape in Pakistani Films. While reading this article, we did learn that Sadaf was talking about images that cinema creates of women over a period of time, or cinema creates images of honored women's honor, or woman's body as embodiment of honor over a period of time. And Sadaf just looked at rape scene in a number of films, or attempt to rape scenes in a number of films, and then she found what she has written in this article, that all of these Pakistani films present woman's honor in a certain style and end woman's life if the honor is at stake. So while reading this article, I did say that that films try to create stereotypes of women, stereotypes in a certain style. Okay, so similarly, this article is actually talking about stereotypes that that West has created about us, and in regards to what Komal said about we having created images of the West as well. This is very true because, for example, Pakistani film presents Western woman as like open with her sexuality, and Pakistani films tend to show Western women as an antagonist in a film, or a modern woman quite westernized. If when Pakistani film actually talks about like a white woman or white woman's sexuality, so Western sexuality is presented as bad and as overt and open in most of Pakistani films, right? So that's why I'm saying that we also create stereotypes of West, white
I'm
man
just
and
gonna
white
add
woman.
last point, please. I'm really sorry. थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा हो गया.
You're saying you missed it, or you don't have it in your
Yeah, I
mind?
was just going to add something. वो नम्रा की बात थी तो
जी
मैं
जी,
चुप
you,
गई
you
थी.
can certainly add जी.
जी. तो I was just thinking कि अगर हम उसको एक और एंगल से देखते हैं, मेरा पॉइंट ये नहीं है कि वो ज़्यादा नहीं करते हैं या फिर उन्होंने स्टार्ट नहीं किया. मैंने बताया कि हम लोग 3-4 साल से ये पढ़ रहे हैं, and I know the concept. But I think the problem is not with the West. The problem lies within the power structures. कि जैसे जिस स्पेस से वेस्ट ने प्रोग्रेस किया है सिनेमा में, अगर वो हम करते तो शायद उस जगह पर हम भी हो सकते थे, क्योंकि हमारा प्रोग्रेस उस स्पेस पे नहीं है. अभी तक हम लोग जिंदगी तमाशा जैसी मूवी लगानी या नहीं लगानी उस पर लड़ रहे हैं, और उनका पेस तो बहुत आगे है ना, फास्टर पेस पे चल रहे थे वो. तो मुझे लगता है कि जो प्रॉब्लम है वो पावर के साथ है, वो वेस्ट या ईस्ट या गोरा काला या फिर इसके साथ नहीं है. मैं सिर्फ ये कह रही थी, बाकी आई टोटली एग्री विद एवरीवन.
Yes, that is very true. So imperialism is about power structures and about world economy also, because I think first world and third world are about, these concepts actually hint at power structures and the difference in economy of the first world and the third world, right? So you're absolutely right that these differences are about the difference in power structures.
Yes, Miss, I want to add further to that point that when you also mentioned how the Hollywood cinema is a part of white imperialism, we also see this how in certain films they use this technique called the yellow filter. So it's sort of a yellow gaze where the whole image showing countries, particularly Southeast and South Asian countries, are doused in a yellow filter to make it look more unhealthy and to further give into the stereotypes that they have regarding the East. So they use such, and they do this mainly when they're filming in places like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Mexico. This is also to further show and correlate not only with their GDP, but also to show the West racism through Hollywood media. So this is an actual technical term they teach and also film their films with.
Okay.
Hello.
All right, sure. What you have just said, it does apply to our cinemas, right? So that's where I mentioned that until we had digital technology, until the time that people from started making from all parts of the world, this Hollywood imperialism was great. And right now, we can see that Hollywood is reaching our homes through Netflix, right? Because right now, everybody can get this Netflix collection for, I think, as low as 1,500 rupees per month in Pakistan, which would be less than $10. So this way, not only white, you can see that Netflix has brought not only Hollywood films to our homes, but it is also producing content of countries. For example, Netflix would sponsor a series in Pakistan or in other parts of the world. So you can see that imperialism is right now molding. And if 2 decades back only few people were making films using digital cameras, right now more or less everybody is making films using his or her like cell phone or computer. You can just go on YouTube and start recording your conversation. For example, what I'm recording with you right now, I uploaded couple of my lectures after, in Google Classroom, because some people had missed classes or somebody had not heard the lectures properly because of signal problems. So I'm saying that right now this Hollywood monopoly is broken for various reasons, because everybody has a gadget in hand that one uses to break Hollywood's imperialism or Hollywood monopoly. And it's absolutely correct what all of you have added about imperialism just now. I think the people who have been reading it quite often are you guys from DLA, because I believe this is part of DLA discussions and courses quite often. Or did psychology people also read about it before?
Ma'am, some of us read it in a DLA course.
All right, that's what I thought, that DLA would definitely cover it. And history students also have, I think they have been reading it about it, because what Saeed is saying actually reflects on history very, very strongly. And he's talking about history that has been consistent and seen in literary thought over 200 years and in paintings over 200 years, because film was not there 200 years ago. Film is, right now, film is about a century and a quarter old, right? So we can see that whatever was there in art and literature actually translated into film. Okay. So if we keep looking at the film, it will be hard for us to complete the article. So I think we can go back to this film during the discussion as and when needed. Okay, now let's try reading this article. It says the exotic, the erotic, and the dangerous South Asian woman in popular film. So basically, Yasmin Jivani is talking about Hollywood films, right? So she's talking about stereotype of South Asian woman in Hollywood films, and she is quite consistent with what Saeed was saying in his interview. Okay, and definitely, as you have read some of some literature on Orientalism before, you can also see that this is quite consistent with what has been said earlier. So Yasmin Jivani actually has divided this article into a number of subheadings. For example, she's talking about images of South Asian in Western popular thought. So it does mean that she is, in this particular paragraph, she's not just talking about the Hollywood film, but she's just talking about image of South Asian in the Western thought, which will be in any form of literature. After that, she talks about South Asian in British literary thought. So you can see that from this heading on the top left, images of South Asian in Western popular thought, she is cutting down to South Asian in British literary thought. And after that, she comes to from print to celluloid. So she's just saying that how these images actually became part of the celluloid or film over a period of time. And then she discusses the stereotypes of contemporary stereotypes of South Asians in Hollywood films, and also not just Hollywood films, but also a few different programs from British TV or TV series, etc. And then she talks about oppositions, hierarchies, and ambivalences related to these images, in the film or media content over a period of time. So if you look at this first paragraph by Yasmin Giovanni on top left, she is primarily looking at two things. For example, she says that this is a short paper, as I said before, and it's particularly focusing on images of women in Hollywood films. So she's saying that this paper actually demonstrates how these images have been used to justify colonial domination, which means that she's referring to the times when we were a colony, for example, right? So she just means that though British have left or though colonies have ended, the colonial domination continues in the form of these images because they provided justification to the white man or to the Western world to colonize us in the past, and this domination continues in the form of films. And then he says that how these images rework power inequalities into symbolic oppositions, because when we talk about these stereotypes or we internalize the stereotypes of South Asians created by Hollywood cinema or Western cinema, we actually again launch us into this power structure or inequality, which serves as the symbolic opposition. So she's just referring to semiotics or symbolism that is used for decoding images in the films. Okay, so she's saying that if you look at past films, literature, and cultural productions of any kind, you would see that these images have been forced and reinforced over a period of time, and these representations are, they form prescriptive and descriptive values for the viewers. These prescriptive and descriptive values describe us as South Asians through Western mind or Western thought. So, in the larger society, this actually refers to what is our place in Western mind. So it says that a given group's place in the larger society is described through the images, and people are seen to live those lifestyles or socialize in those particular forms, and which means that Western thought is actually dictating us who we are, and we internalize these images, or even the Western societies internalize these images about the South Asians. Okay. So in this part, that images of South Asians in Western thought, she's just saying that South Asians have not figured dominantly in popular American thought, because we do believe that we were a colony by the British. We were not a colony by the Americans, but Americans are actually using the same kind of vernacular for us, and they look at us through the same lens. So the British folklore surrounding the Indians mentions Indians as, in a particular style, and that actually shows collective knowledge of the South Asian in British thought, or collective knowledge of the South Asian in the American thought as well. And she says that it has been the similar in 1902 and 1906. Because then she particularly says that though at the start of past century there were only 800 South Asians in America, and the number has tremendously increased over a period of time, the image of South Asians in America has not changed over past 100 years. If you look at this paragraph on the lower left corner on the left side, you can see that she's saying that the numbers have changed from 800 to larger numbers today. So in those times that these South Asians or people from this part of the world were actually residing in California. So if you go to California, you will find people who have been there for over 3 or 4 generations now. Okay, so she's saying that this is imperialist imagination, right? Somebody, I think one of you mentioned these stereotypes are part of Western imagination. So what Jivani is saying that this is imperial imagination. So imperial imagination sees India as a place which is full of squalor, disease, overcrowded, and overcrowding, rampant sexuality, right? Which means and excessive mysticism. If you look at this, second paragraph on the lower left side, she's actually saying that American thought or American imperialist imagination translates the South Asian or Indian as somebody, as a land of squalor, disease, overcrowding, rampant sexuality, and mystic and excessive mysticism, right? So this is precisely that Said was also mentioning in this interview, because he was talking about magic and mysticism that is closely associated with this part of the world. And this article actually tells why they are associating excessive sexuality, for example, with South Asians, because I think, as Komal said earlier, we probably have created similar stereotypes about the Western people, especially white woman and white man, and we are talking about their excessive sexuality all the time, and they are talking about excessive sexuality of South Asian women and South Asian people. Right, so these what she says that the Americans have borrowed this kind of images of mysticism and magic and sexuality from the British literature, and that literature actually starts from back 1813, which is the beginning of 19th century, when American missionaries also came to India. Beginning of 19th century actually means that it was about because America became independent in 1764. So you can actually see this is about 50 years after American independence that American missionaries are traveling to India. And when they came here, they started, they mentioned, the kind of knowledge they took back from India was about what kind of people live in India. So they said salvage souls ostensibly lost to paganism. So when the Americans went back from India back in 1813, American missionaries, they said that in this part of the world people practice paganism. And in the missionary report written in 1852, they said the deplorable ignorance and stubborn prejudices of Hindus, together with their caste system, their entire absence of correct principles, and finally their moral degradation. So it means that the missionaries back in 1852, they did not comment on Muslims when they, at least to the extent of the literature that Yasmin Jivani has found for quoting in this article. She's talking about Hindus, because the American missionaries, it seems, apparently went to Hindu temples. And after visiting the temples, this is the kind of impression they took back to India, they took back to America about the Indian people. They thought the people are stubborn, they are ignorant, and they are full of prejudices. And what Jivani says, that they had actually met Hindus at the temples. She is referring to the caste system in this article. And there is another article that is not exactly on erotic or Oriental images of men or women in literature or in film. The other article that I want to mention is on uh, sanitation labor, because I think you may have come across these memes on social media in the past 2-3 months, that people actually in fact, over past 3-4 years, since 2016 or 17, sanitation workers have been highlighted in Pakistan, because Pakistan emphasizes that only non-Muslim will do this kind of work. So that particular article, I can share that article with you, actually mentions the history of sanitation lies in the Indian caste system, and Yasmin Jivani is also mentioning the Indian caste system here. And in fact, that mentions 5 castes of Hindus. We begin with the Brahmins and Vishyas and Shudras, and and the lowest of the 5 castes is actually the basis for sanitation worker, which means that Indians actually divided work of different kinds among people back in 13th century based on their caste. So from 13th century until today, for 800 years, this Indian caste system actually indicated what kind of work you can have. And all were, like, for example, Brahmins were either teachers or priests, right? And Vishyas were warriors, and the Indian caste system gave work of different kind to people of different background. Okay, so what she's saying, that American missionaries said that these are the India shows moral degradation in many ways. Hindu as lifetime liars and worshippers of a stupendous system of carnal idolatry. So missionaries said that these Hindus were liars because they had actually visited uh, Indian temples at the time. So here, because we are quite often, these are exchanges, like if American missionaries had come to subcontinent in 1850s, it also means that Hindus or Indian people had visited America at the time. So it says in 1893, Swami Vivekananda attended the Parliament of Religions held in Chicago, and in after his visit, he is talking about American, collective imagination. His visit catalyzed the growth of yet another predominant strand in the American collective imagination, because they recognized him as somebody, full of somebody who represented paganism and idolatry system, right? And when he visited America, he said it's a land of unsuspecting and naive public. So Swami Vivekananda actually perceived Americans as naive, right? So it means that naive public primarily composed of gullible white women. So Swami Vivekananda is actually talking about white women back in 1893, and he is thinking that Americans are naive. So he is creating some kind of stereotype of white men and white women for us, and we are while missionaries took back some impressions of uh, South Asian stereotypes from here at the time. So it says that 2 dominant themes appeared in the Western thought, or in the Western thought about the stereotypes of South Asians at the time. The first stereotype deals with American fear and perception of Indians as oversexed men who were obsessed with the desire of sexual intercourse with white women. So basically, the American fear, I think this fear actually also emerged in the article that we discussed in this class. I think before discussing this Sadaf Ahmed's article, we did discuss this article, Why Black Skin, White Masks, and we were reading we were reading Franz Fanon's black skin, white masks, and he said that white man had fear that how a black man or brown man would treat white woman because they were not sure that this barbaric man deserves uh, white woman, and he thought that he can't treat white women well. So again, we can see that this same fear has re-emerged here, and according to Giovanni, it has been there for over 100 years in the Western thought that brown man or black man has sexual desire for white woman, but he is obsessed with this white woman's image. But the second thing that she says that the second one is obsession of brown man for white woman, and the second is the obsession with sexuality, which means that obsession with sexuality is an inherent part of Indian culture. And they explained it through, large population, that they have too many children, and the population is very big in this part of the world, and this is because of the obsession of brown man or Indian with sexuality. By Indian, I mean people who live in India today or were living in Pakistan, though there was no Pakistan at the time, but because he's talking about 19th century women and men, so we can say that the article is referring to rampant sexuality of South Asian men and women back in 19th century and 20th century, and they, as a proof, they use that they have abundance of children, and that is another reason of their poverty. And also, they are saying that this obsession with sexuality was also seen in the images of temple prostitutes, which means that when this group of missionaries was visiting this part of the world and they visited temples, they actually found prostitutes in temples about 200 years ago, which is in 1850s. And it says that these images actually show sexual, violent, disorderly, backward, mystical Indians, right? So you can see that all these images, disordered, backward, mystical, were associated with the South Asian back in 19th century, and these images became a consistent part of the British thought and the American thought about the South Asians over a period of time. So she says that images of South Asian women were significantly absent from those accounts. So from 19th century or 20th century, she says that less images of women are found, primarily because women were domesticated 200 years ago, and the men who were found in California back in 1902 and 1906 were there for work. Right. So if 100 years ago or 120 years ago, men were traveling to America or living in America, California, they were working men, and women were not there for work. So that's why she's saying that images of women were missing from these accounts, except in missionary reports that allude debilitating effects of temple prostitution of women in India. So apart from the missionaries, nobody had mentioned women in the Western thought because of their domestication. Missionaries actually had a chance to interact with women, so missionaries did mention temple prostitutes in their reports back in 1852 and after. Now she says that how British literary thought represents women from this part of the world. She's saying that majorly Kipling's writings, and that is again British imperialist accounts, because we were a colony and British were colonizers. So accounts are actually imperialist. And in his work, Kipling actually mentions Indian woman as a doubly dangerous strain. Why? First, because she's dangerous by virtue of abundant fertility. These Indian women produce a lot of children, so they are dangerous because they are producing a lot of children. Why are they dangerous? Because they distract men, Indian men. And what did the colonizer want from Indian men? The colonizer wanted the Indian man to perform functions of Raj, right? So we had British Raj in this part of the world, and colonizer expected that they will perform their function, but they thought that this Indian woman, because of her abundant sexuality or fertility, she is very distracting for the Indian man, right? So British male could, they thought that if she also uh, succeeds in exciting British white male, uh, like or British male excites her or she excites them. In both cases, they were scared that they will end up mixed race in India. So British government and British people did have, the British rule had a threat of this miscegenation, that if Indian woman has sexual interaction with white male, they will end up with mixed race. And secondly, so one was fear of mixed race and the other was fear of distraction to the power, because she is highly distracting for male who will not do work of the empire, because Indian woman as a quintessential other is different from white woman, right? And she's considered dangerous, first because she's a woman, and second because she is Indian. So both features actually point to her her dangerous, or she's a dangerous strain because she can distract the brown man from work for the empire, and she can distract a white man, and mixed race would be the result of miscegenation. Okay, so she thinks, Yasmin Jivani thinks that both American and Western literature and thought had represented Asian woman or woman from South Asia as a dangerous woman. That's why she gives this title, exotic, erotic, and dangerous. She's exotic. She has abundance of children. And she's distracting male, so she is dangerous, right? So after Kipling, she's for discussing the British thought about women from this part of the world. She's focusing on Kipling's writings, and then she is focusing on what is seen in celluloid, in terms of the same images are translated onto celluloid, right? So she says that these sentiments are echoed in works of Sir H. Rider Haggard, a British colonial officer. And British colonial officers were also saying same things. So what Said says is seen repeated in many other ways, right? So she says that this officer created works such as King Solomon's Mines, She, Aisha, and others that depict Indian or African women as excessively sexual, fertile, and dangerous. So fertility, women's fertility, or South Asian women's fertility is considered as dangerous, as British have considered sexuality of African women. And they think both of them have abundance in terms of sexual behavior and fertility, right? In all these descriptions, the attribution of female characteristics was extended to include the entire colonized nations, just as Saeed was saying, that individual differences are not conceived. Similarly, Western thought or Hollywood films consider see the entire nation in one frame, right? So they don't think that people would have individual differences. They would give them this stereotype, which refers to abundance of children and rampant sexuality. So, because of such discourse, she's saying India became the female body. So the country, we already use she for country when discussing the country. But in terms of what was happening in India, she's saying that India was considered a female body on which rape and subjugation and violence could be subjected by the colonizer. Right, so India became a female body, and violence and rape were seen in all these writings that she mentions. That she says this literature, Rider Haggard literature, is actually showing India as somebody. India as a place that has female characteristics, and that's the reason rape and violence is is seen more in India. She says that it's more the imperialist fiction. Imperialist fiction, American and British films have continuously shown same things, which means the rule of the Raj actually subjugates India as a female train, and for male colonizer, in keeping with the tradition of domination, Indian men who were perceived as allies in the domination of the colonized country were depicted as fierce fighters and faithful Gangadeen types. So they thought that male is a good fighter or a fierce fighter, but the woman is distracting. And all of this kind of images can be seen in films like Bengal Lancer, 1936, Black Watch, 1929, and Gangadeen, 1939. So you can see just before partition, these people, the British and the Americans, were making films in India that actually represented women as distracting and dangerous. And this is a film. Son of India is by MGM, which is an American corporation, and Ranchipur is another American production that is showing men as allies of white. So brown man or man of the subcontinent actually was an ally for the British colony, while woman was distracting for the colony, and she caused failure of the functions of the empire by distracting the white man and the brown man. Right, so it does say that these films actually glorify British Raj. Right, glorification of the Raj is seen in the Far Pavilions, A Passage to India, Jewel in the Crown, and Heat and Dust, which means that these films actually show cultural discrimination as truth, right? So films, when they show cultural discrimination as truth, they actually make white man imperial, and when they represent the domination as truth, discrimination as truth, it means that they already said, the missionaries already said that these Hindus were liars. So it means that imperial is considered as truth and superior, a true and superior, and brown culture is presented as false and inferior, and white is presented as just system, and brown system is full of injustices such as oppression and barbarianism, refer to injustices of brown people, right? Now she says women only figure prominently in these films, if central plots deal with miscegenation, which means if you are showing interracial marriage, then white woman would become superior in the Hollywood film. And if you are not talking about miscegenation or interracial marriage, white woman would not be represented as a prominent character. She would remain as not so prominent, oppressed character in the film, right? So all she's saying that these things actually are same as these film themes actually present images that are very similar to images of women in Kipling's poems, right? So here on the top left, in the top left paragraph, she's saying that these films represent women as babbling incoherently, right? At some generic bazaar kind of situation. So even, like when we were looking at images of women right here, these women in these women, right? Let me skip that. These women, right? You can see these women are in abaya or burqa or in veil. So what she's saying that Kipling's poems and all other literature or films were showing these women as babbling incoherently, which means that women lack the ability to express their intellect or thoughts coherently. They are babbling creatures, right? I actually found an article. Let me open that article for you, that actually talks about women's vernacular. Okay, vernacular actually means what kind of language women use, right? So this is an article by I think Olson, and Olson actually says, Olson is referring to Dante. I think you may have heard his name. He was a great intellectual of his times and is included in a list of 100 greatest men ever born. So Dante actually talks about woman's vernacular or lingua maternal, which means kind of mother tongue, that we are mostly very proud of. We are mostly very proud of mother tongues, but Dante and all these people, you can see this highlighted or red text here. It says vernacular as the vulgar delle feminine, which means women speak vulgar language, right? So over a period of time, when we go back to Yasmin's article, she's only talking about women are not can you see this article, Yasmin's article again? Because he's talking about women's images as babbling incoherent in some generic bazaar that I said. These women in burqa actually look like look like babbling women that he's referring to. Can you see this YouTube image? I'm sorry, I have to ask you because Zoom does not allow you to select only, in Hangout. In Hangouts, you actually see images that I select, but in Zoom I have to select individually. All right, can you see these images in burqa or veil?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So all I meant that Yasmin is saying that Kipling actually showed women as babbling or dangerous. Women speak incoherently. So the article that I selected earlier, Olson's article, mentions Dante, who said that women speak vulgar language. women speak incoherent language. Women cannot. Women are emotional, and you cannot expect an intellectual or coherent discussion from women, right? So here Yasmin is only saying that Hollywood films actually showed babbling, incoherent speech of women, right? Then she says that Haggard uh, also talks about similar kind of things, right? She's referring to earlier articles. Then she talks about films such as Indiana Jones films. Uh, and I think if you go to Indiana Jones films, you would find that Indiana Jones films actually show women from this part of the world again as exotic and erotic and dangerous, and women's function is just to is they are just a tool for men. They serve as they serve to purposes of men. So all she's saying that Indiana Jones films show women in the same fashion, babbling incoherently, and those with fecund sexuality. And then she says she 1935 and she 1965, which must be reproduction of the same, show women of colors as Asiatic. As somebody like in she say, because she refers to myths of this part of the world, she's saying that she is a character who must be obeyed, right? So for this woman, she presents some kind of creature from this kind of the world. And this because in Indian religion we are quite often talking about different kind of mothers, mata, you know. uh, when we talk about mothers and mata, or gods and goddesses who are both men and women by gender, we talk about, some of them are uh, good women, and some even goddesses. Some of them are good and some of them have power of immorality. And when they talk about power of immorality, it normally refers to sexuality, which means that women use sexuality for as their power, and that refers to immorality. So he's saying that that in this particular film, which is She 1935, she is presented as somebody who must be obeyed. She has the power of immorality, and the white hero or protagonist or explorer, Ellen Quatermain, falls in love with she towards the end of the film, because she is a bad woman. She uses secrets of immorality or sex for taking control of Ellen. She dies as in fire. She's burnt in fire towards the end of the film. And Ellen watches her change from a beautiful woman to a horrific hag, right? So she looked like a powerful woman, and a moral of the story was that those who dare to cross the boundaries of race, or they are opting for interracial marriage or miscegenation, actually have bad fate or death. You know, it is very similar to what Sadaf Ahmed was saying in this article on, we read this article by her, Sexualized Images, right? So Sadaf Ahmed was saying that those who broke the norms face death of certain type, right? Uh, here. She said that those who cross the norms or are dishonored, the films actually end at their death or some kind of bad fate that these women, sexualized objects, face. In this case also, she's saying that though the film is showing sexualization of a South Asian woman, but she is immoral because of her sexuality, and she is also somebody who must be obeyed by her very behavior. So she has to die. Such a strong woman must die. Uh, Towards the end of the film, leaving a good moral for white people not to cross the boundaries or boundaries of race, or race and gender and interracial marriage is not approved. It's not appropriate according to the film. This is a silent film here, and I think it would be interesting to see how this silent film presents white woman, because this is very different from the image of the brown woman from this part of the world. Let's see, please carefully see, because this is a silent film. You would only see dialogues appearing as text on screen. You would see that image disappears and a dialogue appears written on the screen. So just please see this. So, did you see the conflict in terms of the dialogue that just appeared on screen? Did you notice it, or should I play it again?
Miss, could you please play it again?
Okay, just see what is happening here and what man says and what the woman says. So this is a silent era film, and the man, which is a man from this part of the world, and you can see he's there in a situation with a white woman. The brown man says, "I am not accustomed to having my orders disobeyed," right? So it's just saying what a man wants. Orders should not be disobeyed. Men give orders to women, and women follow the orders, right? And now try to see the answer that the white woman gives to this man. So the white woman says, "I am not accustomed to obeying orders," right? As I said, that this is an old film, about 90 years or so old film. This is a silent era film. So silent era film is presenting white woman as somebody who can use her voice. She can make decisions, because she's clearly saying, "I'm not accustomed to obeying orders," and the man is telling her he's not accustomed to women not obeying his orders, right? I'm not accustomed to having my orders disobeyed. This is the man's dialogue. And the woman says, "I am not accustomed to obeying orders." So you can say that in this particular scene, man and woman we see a controversy between genders, man and woman being the other, right? Other in terms of gender. So man thinks that his orders should be obeyed, and the woman says she's not accustomed to obeying orders. And again, this is not a brown woman or a South Asian woman. It's a white woman who says, "I'm not accustomed to obeying orders." So you can say even 90 years ago, the Hollywood film is presenting white woman as somebody who can who can follow her wish, and she does not. She's not accustomed to obeying orders. Any comments? I wonder if it was showing the title at the start. As I said, This is a silent era film. Let's see.
Constantly I looked for you, no day or two, but constantly. No prisoners! No prisoners! Come on, then!
Right, so all these images are actually, you can see that people from this part of the world are inferior technology wise, backward. This is also what Said said in this interview, that when they crossed Suez Canal back in 1970s, nobody from West was expecting they would actually cross the canal. At a later stage in the documentary, he does say that West, like for example, French entered Egypt, and they created knowledge of Egypt in every respect about the land, people, and culture. And all those books can be assimilated in 1 meter square area, and you can understand that there would be too many books in 1 meter square area. He says that that Egypt would be unable to produce similar knowledge about France, because they won't have the resources, they wouldn't have financial resources or even human resource for producing that kind of knowledge about a country from the West. So these things would also refer back to inequalities in power and imperialism and colonialism, uh, because they are different. So I was saying that these different articles actually show that women's vernacular or language is inferior because women cannot are emotional, and their language does not make sense, right? So and what Dante said was that he said vulgar is the language of the woman. Like women speak vulgar language in terms of inconsistency, and in terms and they are also very emotional, so you can't make sense of their speech. Okay, so here he says that another film, which is a 1988 film, which means not very old, about 30 or so years old, the film is The Deceivers. It shows the Indian woman as exotic and dangerous again, because a colonial officer played by Pierce Brosnan, like for example, whatever scenes we were watching here just now, we could see that a colonial white officer was found in this kind of landscape, fighting the war for the British. Right? So all she's saying that in this film, The deceiver, a colonial officer, is in India, and he finds a young Indian woman committing sati. Sati means that she is trying to burn herself at her husband's death, right? So this colonial officer pretends as her husband. He images before her when she is committing sati, and she thinks that her husband is alive, so she decides not to commit sati or not to commit herself to death. So actually the white man becomes savior even for the stupid Indian woman who is trying to commit sati in this film, 1986 film. The second time he appears before her is uh, when he finds a prostitute, and the prostitute tries to seduce her, seduce him, and he thinks that, and Giovanni thinks that by creating images of women who are either trying to commit sati or who are either trying to engage him in sexual pleasure, being an Indian prostitute. These are the two images the film has created. So Indian women are either presented as prostitutes or as goddesses engaged in immoral roles, or somebody who can commit sati and die instead of considering her life precious or important. She says in Thagi, Kali, the goddess of destruction, also appears, the principal deity appears, and Kali, she is excessively sexual, fecund, bloodthirsty. So even Kali Mata is is presented as somebody sexual, fecund, and bloodthirsty. So which means that these images of dangerous women of South Asia is again reinforced through through the creation of the image of Kali in the film. Okay, so again she says that women, or because the white man is the master and the brown man is the servant to the master, they remain savage like and brutal, right? So master is is present here to give justice to the people of this part of the world, and the savage, or the Indian brown man actually appears as savage or brutal. We, on the other hand, identify with the colonizer who embodied truth and justice, value of a true civilization. So in the end, films actually desire that we internalize image of white man as somebody who brings justice and civilization to this part of the world. And in that sense, white civilization is true, and brown civilization or South Asians are ghettoized. Okay, so ghettoization of South Asian women into the role of sexually alluring entertainers appears in various other films, right? So South Asian women are only presented as sexual entertainers, or immoral goddesses, or women who like to commit sati kind of actions. South Asian women are only shown as dancers and prostitutes in the films of 1940s, and many of the films produced after. For example, Indiana Jones films and Temple of Dooms do show this kind of images. And if you go to Google Classroom, you would actually find, you will see that here I have posted a scene from Indiana Jones as well. I will not play it right now, but this scene, it says Deborah Paget in Fitland's film, right? So you can see that this is actually a temple, a scene from a temple, and all these brown men are actually sitting around. All these brown men are actually sitting there, and Deborah Paget actually appears in these costumes, but then she drops this costume and dances before the goddess, and you can see this huge image of goddess in the backdrop. So men appear actually very small. They are all wearing, they are covering their lower parts with these white dresses, and their upper bust you can see is naked in the films. And goddess this is a nude bust of the goddess. You can see her. I wonder if you're getting the image here, but she this is a Fitzgerald film, and this is available in Google Classroom in case you want to watch it. Okay, so she's just saying that how the Indiana Jones film and Temple of Doom films presented women in different times. Then she mentions another films, Octopussy, in 1983 film, that you can see individuality is suppressed. Okay, so again, these films do not emphasize on individuality of a person. Individuality is suppressed and difference is leveled. So all the nation and all the people are seen through one lens. And what these films actually do, they exploit. They show images which appear as exploits of a white male. And Indian world is shown through the eyes of the white man. So by sitting in cinema, we are showing our own world. We are seeing our own world through the eyes of the white man, and it's possible that we internalize those images. Here she is mentioning British production, Madame Suzatica. Right, so Madame Suzatica was produced back in 1988, and Shabana Azmi, a very famous and top Indian film protagonist, appeared in Madame Suzatica. And this part, she's only talking about the image of an Indian mother, right, and also the image of an Indian woman. As an Indian mother, Madame Suzatica is obsessed with the success of her son, right? So it means that Indian women as mothers can do anything for the success of their sons. They would they would be obsessed with the success of their sons and use dirty games for their success as well as and when necessary, right? And in the other part, he's saying that she says that Madame Suzatica's hair falls into the samosas because she makes samosas for a local London outlet. And when her hair falls in the samosa that she's making for the London outlet, it means that Madame Suzatica is dirty. She's not somebody who is familiar with hygiene of food. So basically, the image of inappropriate, dirty Indian woman is reinforced through Madame Suzatica's image as a mother who is obsessed with the success of her son, and as a woman or a worker, because Madame Suzatica is actually showing women as working women, a woman, an image that was absent from the cinema of the past, right? So in 1980s films, because she said earlier that in America, early in the 20th century, 800 Indian were living in California, and they were there mostly because of males who sought jobs in California. So women were not highlighted, but right now she's talking about Madame Suzatica, who is living in London and working in London, but then she is a dirty Indian woman who hardly knows about hygiene, and because the film shows her hair dropping into samosas, so she's tradition bound and basically backward. Ji, any comment? Okay, here she is mentioning Star Trek. I wonder if you have watched any episodes of Star Trek. It is from 1970s, and Star Trek, despite being despite being a low budget production, became the super hit production of its times, And Star Trek, that's why the people from 1970s are called, children of 1970s are called Star Trek generations, right? For example, the children of the past couple of decades are considered IT savvy or internet generations. So similarly, 1970s children were Star Trek generations. So Star Trek was actually showing people who were very intelligent, and they were superior in terms of their knowledge of science. And if you're familiar, Star Trek actually featured people who were living in space. Okay, so in this story, there was a character Kambata from this part of the world, but this South Asian woman, the way the Star Trek presented the South Asian woman is quite complex, because they were showing her advanced by cutting her long hair, because Indian women are supposed to have long hair, but Star Trek showed Indian woman as somebody with short hair and scientifically superior. So she had advanced in many ways. You can say that woman's vernacular was changed in Kambata. But despite showing her as somebody, as part of scientific community, as part of space age, Star Trek presented this character obsessed with esoteric arts of sexuality, which means that this character Kambata was interested in something that, known as Kama Sutra in Indian culture, and despite being scientifically advanced in this production, and because which means that woman's vernacular was also changed in Star Trek generation. Despite showing her scientifically superior, the film showed her obsessed with sexuality, because she finds, obsessed means that the lost soul of the Voyager satellite, which means she is, her soul is irrelevant, and she likes performing Kama Sutra kind of acts, which shows her weakness, despite having developed to so much an advanced form of women in Star Trek. So Kambata is scientifically advanced, but emotionally still inferior, because she practices Kama Sutra, and it is her quintessential weakness, right? So it means, Giovanni says that Kambata becomes another piece of exotica, despite being scientifically superior in Star Trek, right? She lives in space. She is intelligent and mentally advanced form of woman, but because she belongs to India, she becomes a mere piece of exotica and practices something like Kama Sutra in Star Trek generation. It means, Giovanni says, by doing so, she becomes part of male gaze in this production, and which means the white male has appropriated her body as again exotic in Star Trek. Okay, this appropriation of body, it actually shows categorical schema of our observers. Like, viewers should be seeing this Indian woman as an exotic image. So categorical schema is assigned to categorical schema is assigned to this Indian character in Star Trek. Any comment on Kambata, the Indian woman in Star Trek? All Yasmin is saying that through such behavior, Kambata becomes part of white imagination, or white man's creation of brown woman as an exotic image, even in a production like Star Trek. Okay. So in this part, Giovanni is actually talking about contemporary stereotypes of Indian women in Western Hemisphere. She says that right now we are looking at diaspora films. For example, we know that Indians living in Canada or America and UK have started making their own films. Right now, we can see that diaspora films are coming. Diaspora films are produced in English language, but they represent our cultures. Most of these films are made by people who settled in Canada, America, or Britain, or other parts of the world. So they actually belong to new cultures now, but they still have their old cultures with them, right? So despite living in America or USA, they haven't left their own Indian culture or Pakistani culture behind. They still feel part of Pakistani families. They have left back in their countries, or for example, Pakistan or India. So they make diaspora films. Okay, so she's saying that this kind of treatment of Oriental woman is now merged into the stereotypes that are still seen in diaspora films. And for example, she gives example of the film by Meera Nair. Film's title is Mississippi Masala. And in Mississippi Masala, you will see an Indian woman in a love relationship with Denzel Washington. Right, so Denzel Washington is again a black hero that Meera Nair cast in her film Mississippi Masala. So what she says, what Yasmin Jivani says, that these diaspora films show early women who went to America or US or America or UK or Canada or other part of Western world with their husbands. So these women were very submissive and traditional and victims of patriarchal structure, right? Because they were exposed to arranged marriages, domestic violence, and cultural conflict as a refugee or as a migrant woman who was living in the West, right? So these exotic erotic women were women are shown as victim of patriarchal structures even in diaspora films if they belong to the past generation, right? So women who migrated are submissive, but what about their children or their daughters who are born in Western societies? And diaspora films actually revolve around the stereotypes that resonate with the colonial tradition, like their past generation is shown as submissive and traditional, right? But film like Mississippi Masala shows the conflict of the new generation with the culture of their mothers. The Mississippi Masala shows the heroine's mother is someone who is submissive and tradition bound, but heroine wants to break away from cultural background, right? And heroine is presented as somebody who is very, very strong, who is not backward, and she wants to leave the racist patriarchal culture behind. She wants to move on, and she wants to have a relationship with Denzel Washington, but the mother keeps opposing the daughter, right? So the protagonist is strong and independent, but she says that she becomes strong and independent by disowning her original culture, right? So again, because she disowns her original culture and she starts owning Western culture by living in the West, it means that disowning is extremely important for this kind of diaspora films. Okay, so once people get dislocated, she acquires a fullness of character that is denied to her within the larger Indian tradition, which means she becomes an independent and strong character only when she leaves behind the Indian culture that denied her those powers. The Indian culture denied her independence the Indian culture denied her, all kind of strength and voice. And the protagonist in this film, Mississippi Masala, becomes strong once she leaves the Indian tradition and Indian culture, and she reaffirms the stereotypical notion that there is only one South Asian culture, and that culture is highly repressive in its orientation to women. So if you want to become strong, you have to disown your original culture. Okay. So she's saying that Mississippi Masala is very consistent with other films. Another film is titled Masala. That's a 1991 film, and still another, Lonely in America, 1990. Sam and Me, 1991, where you can see that all of these actually are presenting some kind of miscegenation. Miscegenation meaning that intercultural interaction in a love relationship, or these films are actually showing that women are emasculated, or they emasculate, or when they leave their culture behind. They are emasculated and rendered powerless unless they happen to have assimilated the dominant society's norms. So what she's saying, that films show that you can make yourself powerful by assimilating norms of the dominant society. Okay. Krishna in Masala is the only macho character in the entire film. He clearly rejects the Indian cultural background, becomes part of the Western culture or white society, accepts white norms as his norms to become powerful, right? And to get voice, or to become a subject. Okay. So in this last part, Yasmin is actually talking about oppositions and hierarchies and ambivalences. She says the circulation of images of South Asian women as a tradition-bound, submissive, weak, and victimized affirms the image of the West as the advanced and progress society. So unless the West creates an other who is barbaric or oppressive, West cannot promote itself as imperial, as powerful, as just, or progressive. So the image, the negative image of the other is essential for asserting positive image of the imperial white man. Okay. All right. So it just says that underneath all these kind of messages lie paternalistic variant of colonial relations, which means that British intervention is legitimized in Indian affairs by showing this kind of women, because the British intervention is legitimized by showing this kind of images of Oriental men and women, right? So it justifies what the Raj was doing here. When Raj emphasizes on rampant sexuality, or when Kipling emphasizes on this kind of images, or the British officers wrote this kind of literature about people from this kind of India, or when Hollywood made films showing women and men of this kind, they only emphasize their rampant sexuality, fecundity, and fecundity only meaning that they produce a lot of children, as opposition to the supposed Puritan self-control of the West. Which means the white people have the control on their sexuality, and brown people have no control of their sexuality. They produce an abundance of children due to a lack of control, which means that British intervention is again legitimized, and British or white self-control, Puritan self-control is emphasized. And then she says that these kind of images actually lock the third world in a system of representation that define it as female. So in the earlier part, she was saying that Raj defined India as female, whose body was to be violated. And right now, she's saying that these images give a right to the West to violate the body of the third world. A system of representation that defines third world as female, other, chaotic, primitive, emotional. So just as women are considered chaotic, primitive, and emotional, India was considered chaotic, primitive, and emotional, and so is the third world, defined through representations that show the third world as chaotic, primitive, and emotional. So basically, proper vernacular for the third world is becomes vulgar at this point. So you cannot imagine third world speaking any better language than the immoral or barbaric language that they speak. These oppositions mask the historical factors that have led to economic underdevelopment. So in the end, I think when you mentioned power relation in the at the start, you can see that by now Yasmin is actually talking about economic imbalance in terms of power relations between third world and first world. And she's saying that the destruction of indigenous economies and the imposition of exploitative relations or domination on the cultural fabric of these nations are shown. So these films actually show that show economic exploitation of people from the East and people from the third world. I mean, they create these films keep on creating patterns of perception. Imperialist thought and colonial mentality actually presents brown man as inferior. Not through images, but also in terms of their behavior when it comes to or behavior or functions. By functions, it means that male was suitable for functions of Raj, but women were seen as distracting. And all these women, which here she's saying that these created reasons for economic exploitation of the countries of the third world. Let's see what he's saying here.
Struggle for national independence, and in the case of the Palestinians, for national self-determination, to see for
racism that comes from the United States towards Muslim people and towards Arabic people, and that's something that has to stop. And the United States has to start respecting people from the Middle East in order to find a solution to the problem that's been building up over many years. So I thank everyone for your patience and letting me speak on mine on that.
Okay, so you can see that this was a musical band, Beastie, and from 1990s they are just saying that this band was actually trying to speak to
problems in our own society.
like people from here.
As a result, the human side of the Islamic and especially Arabic world are rarely to be found. And the net result is this vacancy on the one hand, and these easy, almost automatic images of terror and violence.
Right, so these are the type of images that Hollywood films show about people from this part of the world, people who are hideous. They're not even showing their faces to the world. And women are more hideous because in many cases you will find them in a baya or veil. So which means that the danger associated to the woman increases.
The whole history of these.
So this was from True Lies 1994. This True Lies actually starts with an ID card image, because somebody is showing ID card at the airport, and you can clearly read the article is printed in Arabic. The text is very similar to Urdu text, so you can read Arabic and realize that it's True Lies is actually a film that
Orientalist representations, which
presents
portrayed the Muslim
Arabs as
and the
primitive
Oriental as, in effect, a
and
lesser breed.
barbaric
In other words,
and very harmful to
the only thing they understand is the language of force.
harmful
This
to
is the
Western
principle here. Unless
freedom.
you give them a bloody
You
nose, they
can
won't understand. We can't
associate
talk reason with them.
you can associate the same to
Is the
uh,
Arab world full of terror?
you can associate to it to what Trump did, because Trump was talking about Orlando disaster or attack by a Muslim from Afghanistan on this nightclub in Orlando where he killed 49 homosexuals. So Trump actually was talking about dangers associated with people from this part of the world who were constantly against freedom to be what you want to be, or freedom of women, which means freedom of gender to be third gender, or freedom to be a transgender, or freedom to declare any gender for yourself. If you are a woman, you can say declare any gender for yourself, or if you are a male, you can also choose any gender to express yourself. It says that West actually legitimizes this kind of images against the hordes, right? So by hordes, she was earlier saying, and Said was also saying, that the whole nation is seen as one person. Faces or individualism disappear in the Western imagination. And but right now Yasmin Jivani is not even talking about nations, she's talking about hordes, right? Hordes of people, where there is no individualization and people are seen by specific characteristics or features, and these are historical connotations are associated with South Asian women in general. Hence, the character of domineering woman becomes the force by which woman's identity is singularized against the backdrop of nameless hordes. So she's saying that the woman, whether she's a mother or she's in a different role, like a sensual woman, she is part of a horde. And these images are appropriated as a sign in the Western thought, and they have roots in historical relationships of inequality and otherness. Okay, so the symbolic value of the South Asian woman as a sign in the system of visual signs and forms of language of cinema evokes this chain of association, which means that stock knowledge actually, or the Western imagination or Western society represents these women as part of hordes, as sensual, dangerous, exotic, and South Asian dangerous women are attractive and repulsive simultaneously. This is what she's saying towards the end, that when films present characters as even deities as harmful, they actually show them as exotic and dangerous, and they are attractive but repulsive simultaneously. So which means that Hollywood films present white women as brown women who are attractive but repulsive, and it means that the moral of the story in many cases would be, don't cross the norms of culture or race or boundaries of culture or race, because in the end you will show a woman dying in fire or burning in fire, changing into a terrible hag because she is dangerous because of her freedom and sexuality, and it is the difference that remains fixed in many cases. Okay, any comments on any of the ideas that we have discussed here? We have finished Jivani's article. She is talking about South Asian women and men as hordes. She is talking about legitimation of British intervention, legitimation of Raj and fear of Raj, about fecundity of South Asian woman. Fecundity only means the ability to produce a number of children, fertility of woman. And this article actually shows that 1930s films were not showing women as working women because women, people or families who had migrated to India, to America or California at the start of 20th century, they were dominated by working men and not working women. So working South Asian women probably did not appear in the Western films or media until they produced Madame Suzatica 1988. So you can see a very long absence of working South Asian women from American thought or Western thought until the 1980s. But when she finally appeared when finally a working woman appeared in the Western thought, working South Asian woman appeared in the Western thought or film and media. She was still shown as a dirty woman who was tradition bound and basically backward, and she was unfamiliar with requirements of hygiene, and she had acquired this working woman status by through her presence in the Western society. So it means that the film was not actually showing working women in the Indian or South Asian society, but it was showing working women in the West, working South Asian woman in the West. And she specifically mentioned diaspora films such as Mississippi Masala and Lonely in America and Sam and Me, just to say that these films show South Asian women as opportunistic, right? So there was an opportunity for the female protagonist to marry Denzel Washington and become part of white society by rejecting her own culture and accepting culture of the West, right? So she gains voice, she gains woman's mobility, and she becomes powerful and strong by disowning her own culture or disassociating from her own culture. So even through disassociation, the superiority of white culture is shown, because white culture is the one that is giving the woman the right to be what she is and to express herself the way she wants to express herself. The way, like in this one, we did see that a white woman, even in 1920s, had the right to express herself and to disobey man's orders. And the brown woman does not have the right to disobey man's order even in the 21st century. So actually the films secure a white woman's status as culturally superior because she is in charge of her will in a scene that we saw here, right? She clearly says, I'm not accustomed to disobeying orders. While the Oriental man says, I'm not accustomed to my orders disobeyed. Okay, so let's see what.
And let the fat and the rich and the corrupt in far places mark this moment and turn in fear of all those miracles to come. And let none in all Islam from this victorious hour believe I am other than the expected one, the true Mahdi. Beloved, it is the hour of prayer.
So I think this was this here they are only reinforcing image of Prophet Muhammad in terms of like you can see the images of followers also show very backward people who are carrying swords and people who are behaving in a particular way.
Oh, I come from a land, from a faraway place, where the caravan camels roam, where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home.
So if you noticed that Aladdin actually starts from the description of a faraway land, that it says they cut off their ears and it's barbaric, etc. Right? So you can see that even despite being a children's film or a universal a film that attracts universal audience, if you carefully listen what they are saying in the title song, it is the description of the man from this part of the world, right? So you can see that it begins with people, images of people traveling on camels, and it describes those peoples as barbaric from the very start of the film. So Orientalism is actually perceived as something which is far away, people who live far away and people who are actually barbaric.
Oh, I come from a land, from a faraway place, where the caravan camels roam, where they cut off your ear if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home.
See, it says they cut off your ears, they do not like your face, it's barbaric. So that's why I'm saying that if you see these lyrics, the film actually begins by presenting very negative image of the people living in the Orient.
Not our mission, Carlo. You don't belong here. What is the matter with you? Fucking know better. We're not involved in this problem, Major Gates. Do you understand me? You're AWOL, and you're under arrest. Are you gonna let us kill those people? Not right, Ron. Yes.
Okay, any comments? So Saeed was actually referring to the same things, that these images reappear and reappear as a prophecy. So you can see that films would show Muhammad or followers of Muhammad in this fashion as primitive and barbaric, and create images that are very that create fear for the white man. Ji, any comments?
Miss, I had a question.
जी
मिस जो साउथ एशियन women of fertility की बात हो रही थी, so in one of our DLA courses we actually studied why we have this huge problem of population, and like most of the reasons were socioeconomic, which is why people tend to reproduce a lot. So were these filmmakers entirely detached from the prevalent situation within our countries, that they were not able to assess this very basic thing, that in any society where you have where you're lacking in socioeconomic facilities, and your only resource of producing any form of revenue is the amount of labor you're able to produce, जो कि इंसानों से आता है. Hence why reproduction is an expectation. So like were these filmmakers, or did they not even try to or attempt to go into studying this thing about our societies more?
Some of these films are very old films, because I think some of the clips here were from 1930s, right? And the child labor issue was, I think, child labor issue was brought into limelight uh, back in you can say probably in 1990s, because some of the NGOs started making child labor films on Pakistan, and you can say that those films on child labor are uh, pretty new phenomenon. I mean, not exactly new, because by now they are about 25 to 30 years old. If people started making films on child labor issues in India and Pakistan, they are hardly 30 years old. And the films that we have seen, some of the clips were actually pointing to film. This is from 1938, for example. And after this 1938, the other clip was from 1942, right? So you can see that one is from 1938, one from 1942, and then this one is talking about, these two are singing a song about Morocco. So you can clearly see that despite being part of like African world, these films are actually referring to Egyptians, Moroccans, people from Arab countries, Middle East, etc. And all of these films are actually, it shows Arabian Nights. So very clearly the films are targeting people, and the question was about child labor issue and children being source of income, and having a lot of children to get more income and more money. Yes, it's a problem, but I'm sure that the Hollywood probably has not looked at child labor problem in this part of the world so far. So we will see child labor issues discussed in the documentaries, but apparently we are not looking at child labor in any of the scenes that we have seen today. So probably you can probably say that suggests an interesting new theme for one of future fiction films. We can see. I think Anil Kapoor got perhaps got an Oscar nomination for one of his Indian films, and in that film you could see child labor issues addressed in the Indian cinema. But child labor issues, I'm not seeing child labor issues or child labor representation of South Asia in Hollywood films at present. I think right now we do not have a clip from Hollywood that is pointing to child labor being part of South Asian economy or Eastern economy. Yeah, that's a good observation that these films are not looking at that. But what this article is talking about is, like fecundity of woman, sexuality, fecundity definitely associated with dangerous sexuality, because it again says that men are, like poor. These people are poor, but they are dangerously good in producing a number of children. That's why he says rampant sexuality and excessive sexuality, fecundity, and excessive mysticism and magic. That is part of this part of the world, and that's why Hollywood, she says, presents South Asia or South Asian women as exotic and dangerous and distracting. But they are attracting, distracting, and also repulsive simultaneously for the Western or the white man.
Ma'am, so like even in our modern times, these representations still exist because that's the basis upon which Hollywood movies ever hire Indian actresses at all, because they are somehow exotic and erotic, and you know, those dark-skinned, beautiful women with big eyes. That's their description of how they view South Asian women, and it's interesting how in our modern times now they are actually profiting off of the very things that they somehow demonized in their literature, which is the sexuality and all of that. For example, Kama Sutra is something which is time and again now used in Hollywood movies to make jokes upon, or to somehow like there are so many variations of it in Hollywood movies itself that are presented. And this one thing is also very interesting. Like the narrative still prevail, it's just in a different manner now.
Very true. Very true. So even if, what's her name? Chopra, you know, when yes, Priyanka Chopra, when she appears in Hollywood films, we see this tension. And again, because she has married a white guy, I think Yasmin Javani was saying that they get a prominent place in the film only when they appear in relationship with the white guy. And then, you know, then you have to look at Priyanka Chopra role in the film or the TV serial. You know, like what kind of ending the film gives to that kind of role. Because it just, you know, like Sadaf's article was also pointing to certain fate of these characters in the film. And the Hollywood, Bollywood or Lollywood films would also show a certain fate of the characters. You know, stereotypes do prevail, and a Pakistani film would show a certain stereotype of white woman, and Hollywood films would emphasize certain stereotypes, because as we can see that, you know, like Trump actually used these stereotypes to win the election campaign. So Trump used fear mongering. You know, fear mongering is another theory that politicians use fear mongering to win votes or win elections. And if you look at real-time death scores of America, you would realize that abortion remains on top. Because right now it is July. If you can find real-time death scores on Google of America, and if you find that real-time death score website, you would see that by now in July, beginning of August, more than 1 million women would have died in America because of abortion, right? And when Trump won the elections, about 10 million women had died because of abortion, yet he emphasized on 49 deaths in Orlando nightclub, you know, because those 49 deaths were referring to Muslims' attack on white freedom or American dream, or freedom of woman to live the way she wants to live, or freedom of any gender to be what they want to be. So basically, you can see that she's just saying that this is how the images are presented, and that's all. I would suggest, as you suggested, that we also present stereotypes of white people in our films or in South Asian films. You could pick up a few different scenes. If you're interested, you can pick up scenes of white people in our films, and you can see how white man or white woman is presented in our films, because we also create their stereotypes, because we do say, we think that our women are are traditional and good women, and white women are immoral. You know, because our, as I said earlier while discussing visual pleasure in cinema, that we present our culture as that Pakistani films were actually showing traditional women as good women, and in early films, white women appeared as antagonist or uh, sorry, I meant in early films, westernized or modern women appeared as antagonists, you know. So I had posted this article here, and I shared this article with you. We discussed in class that in this particular, this article mentions the censorship uh, items, and it does say that Western nudity. Can you see Western nudity in the fourth row? It says Duniya Hai Dil Walon Ki was showing women in bathers or women, westernized women, as immoral. So you can actually say that we also have a tendency of creating uh, stereotypes of white women and westernized nudity, because people in this part of the world do believe that Western women are immoral in many cases because they can have premarital sex and adultery or postmarital sex. So I find it interesting, this article interesting in a way that it says that West looks at us in the manner we look at them. West uh, thinks we have rampant sexuality here, and our society thinks that Western society has uncontrolled rampant sexuality, right? So that's why I felt that it's quite interesting that West and East have been saying perhaps similar things about each other uh, for for the past couple of centuries or longer. Even if you look at literature that points to Salahuddin Ayyubi's wars, you would find that the literature actually says that white queens or white women were trying to distract Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi through their beauty and sexuality. So, as a matter of fact, even our literature has been pointing to white uncontrolled sexuality or white women who had no control of their self, you know, their morals. We have been saying similar things for a very long time. Okay, I have marked attendance, so unless you have some questions, if anybody wants to go, can definitely go. But anyway, any questions, any other thing, any comment? If no, I think we should end today's session. Okay, thank you. All right, the class is over.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.